welcome everyone to another edition of The Radical Imagination. I'm Michael Pelias, one of the co-hosts, with my co-host today, who will be Peter Bratsis. I'm first going to begin, before introducing our guest, with an announcement about an event that takes place next Wednesday, May 4th, 4 to 6 o'clock at John Jay, 59th Street and 10th Avenue. The title is Transformative Justice, Combating Dark Money on Campus, and it's hosted by one of the co-hosts of The Radical Imagination, James Vretos, with an all-star cast of Dr. James Gilligan, Dr. Dolores Jones Brown, and Dr. Carl Hicks, author of High Price. So please, if you have some time, attend this. It should be very interesting event next week, next Wednesday. And also, speaking of next Wednesday, we will have Cornel West and Stanley Aronowitz talking about Left Turn, the possibility of forging a new political future, which we desperately need, given the lineup of this year's presidential election. Speaking of which, I want to introduce our guest. Today we're pleased to have Doug Henwood, the author of the recent book, My Turn, Hilary Clinton Targets the Presidency. You can probably see the image on the screen, and with Doug Henwood, and we're going to talk about the controversial cover in the beginning and what it signifies, et cetera, and go into a long discussion about the Clinton political machine in general, both its chronology and its effect today. Doug also has a very excellent radio program that I listen to religiously on Thursdays at 3 o'clock East Coast time. It's out of Pacifica Radio on the West Coast, and KFPA, right? KPFA, I'm sorry. KPFA on the West Coast, and it's at noon on the West Coast. Every Thursday, called Behind the News. Very, very good program. So anyway, I'm pleased to welcome Doug, and maybe we can start with the cover of the book and the controversy that it generated when it first came out in 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, when I was thinking about the book, I met this artist, Sarah Soul, who painted the cover, on Facebook a few years ago. And when it came time to think about cover art for the book, I thought, oh, one of her paintings would be great. She, one night in 2007, had a dream about Hilary and hasn't been the same since. She's obsessed with Hilary. You look at her website, sarah-soul.com, and you can find scores of paintings of Hilary, collages of Hilary with the artist, solo, many of them fairly erotic, many of them somewhat violent, but just all the product of a great obsession with the image of Hilary Clinton. She's very fond of her. She knew I was not very fond of her, but she let me use the image. And when it was released to the public, it caused a great deal of controversy at first. People thought it was misogynistic in some sense, although there's a significant minority of people that said it made Hilary look very appealing because it made her look tough and badass. But anyway, it succeeded in getting people to talk about it. I think more people have reacted to the cover than the book itself, but I hope that will change.
Great. Peter, you want to maybe make a comment?
And the idea for the book came from an article you wrote in Harper's?
Yeah, the publisher of Harper's, Rick MacArthur, asked me to do an article in the summer of 2014. It appeared at the cover story in Harper's. November 2014, I was widely denounced for that by loyal Democrats because you presumably can't criticize Hillary without promoting the candidacy of Ted Cruz or something. That was what I was accused of. What do you want, President Cruz? And then my friend and publisher Colin Robinson, who's done 2 earlier books of mine as well, asked me to turn it into a little book, and I just spent about 2 months turning it into a little book. I'd never had such a non-neurotic writing experience in my life, and pumped it out. And then they published it first, Or Books, and trade rights were then bought by 7 Stories Press. So it'll be coming out in a somewhat updated 7 Stories Press edition in a few weeks.
Excellent. I just want to mention, I didn't mention at the beginning, Doug is also the author of a book, Wall Street, many years ago, of which I used in a class of mine called Philosophy of Money, and the students really enjoyed it, and it served a very worthwhile purpose in the course, and very extremely well written, and a very good analysis of how Wall Street works. And then after that, he followed it with After the New Economy, if I'm not
Yeah, that was
mistaken,
2004.
2004.
Yeah.
Right. So, Doug has a very long background in understanding the workings of late capitalism, and certainly has the vocabulary of political economy. And I
always think
in
that
one
late
of the
capitalism
better-
is excessively optimistic.
Yes, I understand that. Yes, I'm projecting many hundreds of
Yeah.
years out, but anyway, in the geological
Yes.
time scale. So anyway, maybe we could begin with a kind of chronology of the Clinton. You've mentioned us before the show that this has been a 40 years they've been running for the presidency.
Yeah.
Maybe we can trace it back to the early days in Arkansas. They both went to Yale Law School. Their relationship to the Haiti, the country of
Yeah.
Haiti,
There are many-
as well as Walmart, and maybe we can go through this.
It's a long story. They met at Yale Law School while
Yeah,
students
yeah.
there, and their first date actually involved crossing a picket line. The workers at Yale were on strike, I think in 1973. I was there too, but I didn't know them. And Yale has a terrible history of labor relations, and this is one of the many strikes they had. The art gallery was closed. There had been an exhibit there that Bill wanted to take Hilary to on a date, and he persuaded the guard to open the museum just for them, and he pushed aside all the trash bags that had accumulated in the doorway. So they're technically crossing a picket line on their first date, which is a nice, set the tone for the rest of their lives. They, from the first, very early on, Hilary was initially a little reluctant to get together with Bill in a romantic way, but she came around. But from very early on, they were convinced they had a joint political career ahead of them. She, in particular, would tell anyone she met that he was going to be president, and people say, "Oh, come on, you're nuts." And Bill would say, "Oh, she's got a bright future ahead of her. She'll be a senator someday or something." And then they conceived of something, after they've been together a little while, they called The Journey with a capital J, which was this long political career they imagined they had ahead of them. And then later on, when Bill became president, it kind of transformed into 8 years of Bill and 8 years of Hill. They've really been working on this for decades and decades, and it shows. I mean, they've really developed quite a formidable political machine with lots of favors to call in around the country. They're masterful politicians and sort of founding a political dynasty in a sense. And we can watch this before our eyes. I don't know if Chelsea has a future ahead of her in politics, but the two of them together have been a formidable machine, and neither of them would have gotten very far without the other. I think it's very important. When I started doing this research, I just thought Hilary was more of a passenger on the Bill Express, but absolutely not. They've been really an equal partnership from the first.
Right,
they have
right.
very complementary styles of thinking and complementary temperaments. Bill is more of a guy who relies on intuition and charisma. He's extremely intelligent. They both are extremely intelligent. But she's more of a methodical thinker. Their political consultant and pollster for many years, Dick Morris, said she has the mind of a trial lawyer. But she provided discipline for Bill's indiscipline, but he also provided inspiration for her lack of it. So it's been a tremendous synergy between them that shows until this day.
Yes.
When she got out of law school, she went to work at the Children's Defense Fund. She had heard Marion Wright Edelman speak when she was at the Yale Law School and was very impressed with her. And when Edelman founded the Children's Defense Fund, Hilary went to work for it at the beginning. So that is the basis of her longstanding claim that she has always been an advocate for women and children, which is based on a year or two of work in the Children's Defense
An
Fund.
internship, in other words.
Yeah, when she's her first job out of law school.
Yeah.
So then she goes to Arkansas and worked in a legal clinic for a while, and then her husband becomes Attorney General, and she goes to work for the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, which was the most prestigious law firm in Arkansas, represented the big names of corporate Arkansas, including most notoriously Walmart, but also Tyson Foods, and what's that truck? There's a big trucking company based there, Stevens, the investment bank.
Stevens, yeah.
The biggest investment bank west of the Mississippi.
Right.
So she went from being this advocate for children to very quickly being an advocate for Walmart. And then she got recruited to the Walmart board by Sam Walton, because even then, Walmart was under criticism for discrimination against women. And Sam Walton thought that by having her on the board, it was diffuse some of that criticism. She, of course, didn't say a word about the discrimination against women. She didn't say a word about their anti-labor policies. In fact, when she was First Lady of Arkansas, she led a war on the Arkansas Teachers Union. and instituted competency tests for Arkansas teachers, and like maligned their skills and preparedness to be teachers. So in many ways, they really pioneered a lot of what we think of as this kind of corporate DLC, business-friendly democratic style of politics, starting in Arkansas in the late 70s and early 80s. So they've been at this a long, long time.
Excellent. Yeah. And the relationship to Haiti, because it
Well,
seems like that's another.
They do have a long.
We can segue to the
they do have a long-standing history with Haiti,
Yeah.
which was that the second leg of their honeymoon, they
Yes.
went to Haiti, and it was paid for. Again, another thing that sets the tone for their lives. It was paid for by a guy who worked for Citibank. Their honeymoon, and it's not clear there was no quid pro quo, but it was just something like, you know, their first date is crossing a picket line. Their honeymoon is paid for by a guy who works for Citibank. It sort of, you know, says something about who they were going to be.
What was the motivation, you think, for that? It was a friend who gave
It was
them
just a
as
friend.
gift?
Yeah, I think they were
And
kind of broke in those
why
days.
choose Haiti of all places if you're going to get
For
a
a honeymoon.
Citibank
Yeah.
check? Why aren't you, going to Montenegro
Well,
at least to the Aegean?
He eventually became a whistleblower about some
Right.
foreign exchange
Right.
transactions, so he was not long for Citibank, but
Right.
it's just
Right.
it was just
Right.
a sweet touch. But that began a long relationship the two of them have had with
Right.
Haiti,
Right.
which continued into her time as Secretary of State, when after the earthquake in 2010. The State Department ran a lot of the official side of the reconstruction efforts, and the Clinton Foundation, headed then by Bill, ran a lot of the private side of it, the NGO side of it. And he was also the UN's chief for the Haitian Reconstruction. So basically, Hillary and Bill Clinton, as an article in Politico put it a year or so ago, became the king and queen of Haiti for a while. They
Interesting.
totally
Yeah.
ran the reconstruction effort,
Yeah.
which was an absolute disaster, a
Right.
corrupt, absolute disaster. They built almost no housing. They were supposed to provide emergency housing for people who were displaced. They did almost none of that. The Haitians were in need of basic infrastructure reconstruction, food, and their headline effort was creating a low-wage garment factory in the northern part of the country. They actually threw farmers off the land. It's a country that desperately needs food. They threw them off the land, built this garment factory, which ended up only producing 1/10 the number of jobs they had promised. Right. And next to the factory, they built this horrendous housing for the workers. No plumbing, little like box-sized rooms, one pump for the water needs for about, I think, 40 units. And it was just a disgrace. An architect I talked to, Greg Higgins, did a review of it, the design, and said it was just an absolute disgrace. And then he actually saw the construction a little later and said it's even more badly built than the design suggested. But they did succeed. Oh, and they also provided some toxic trailers in place of they were supposed to be temporary schools, and then later temporary housing. They were provided by Clayton Homes, which were the same ones that provided the toxic trailers to FEMA after Hurricane Katrina.
Katrina, yes.
With
I know
similar
that
results.
well.
It was contaminated with formaldehyde.
Yes.
People were sickened by these things. So, not once but twice. Clayton Homes, by the way, is owned by Warren Buffett, who is a major contributor to the Clinton Foundation, and for some reason has a reputation as a nice, liberal, humane billionaire. But he's anything but.
He was going to pay more taxes for us to
Yes,
help
he was.
us out, as you remember.
Yes. But instead, it provides toxic trailers.
Right.
But the major achievement of their Haitian reconstruction efforts was building 2 luxury hotels in Port-au-Prince. They're I think very underoccupied. They're underutilized. But that in a country that desperately needed real housing, they built this failed garment factory, this horrible worker housing. And 2 luxury hotels in Port-au-Prince, and also luxury housing for the embassy workers, the U.S. embassy workers. State-of-the-art LEED everything, $1 million a unit. So that's really the priorities of what the Clintons did in Haiti. Right. And curiously, when Hillary took office, she made a point of saying Haiti was going to be a special project of hers. She was going to, this before the earthquake even, there would be a new kind of economic development. They were going to bring, business to Haiti and investment to Haiti. None of that, of course, materialized. And actually, her State Department fought an increase in the minimum wage from $3 a day to $5 a day in the garment industry. The U.S. Garment manufacturers that operated in Haiti didn't want an increase in the minimum wage to $5 a day. and her State Department helped the effort to quash it in the Haitian parliament.
Just to add to this, also there's a relationship to Carnival Cruise Lines, right? To the Israeli billionaire.
Oh, yes,
who
he's
owns,
a good friend of theirs.
Good
yes.
friend of theirs,
Yeah.
who also I think has some designs in terms of bringing in tours to Haiti. So this tourist aspect is also, going to play out, after the earthquake. And,
Yeah, I was very
today.
disappointed that
Yeah,
issue
yeah,
didn't really
yeah.
come out in
Yeah.
the New York primary
Right,
campaign
right.
because a lot of Haitians live in New York City, and
Yes.
just the maltreatment, the disgraceful maltreatment of the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, whose annual, the average income in Haiti is equal to I think 12 seconds of her speaking fee. So it's a real grotesque imbalance there.
Right.
Doug, if we go
yeah,
back to
yeah.
the 90s,
Yeah.
during the Clinton presidency, many of the policies focused on today began there. NAFTA, of course, a lot of the rise of incarceration came from legislation during that time.
Workfare.
Workfare, of course, the end of welfare as we know it. Now, she recently has said she no longer agrees with things like NAFTA, or she supported then, but she no longer would support it. What was, from what we know, Hillary Clinton's role and position in much of the legislation from the 90s?
Well, just as a first point, nothing she says should be believed. If she says she's against a trade agreement, she will almost certainly fight for it when she's in office.
Right.
So she pulled out with the Colombian Free Trade Agreement. She was against it in the 2008 campaign. When she became Secretary of State, she fought for it. She was very active in negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership while Secretary of State. Now she's against it. And you can be sure if she becomes president, which I think is likely that she will, it's almost certain she will then embrace the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So believe nothing she says on the campaign trail, really. But on those things you mentioned, she was an enthusiastic supporter of all of them. She was very pro-NAFTA. She was a first lady. She didn't have any official power, but she was very involved. She's very thoughtful. She's very sophisticated. She knows what she's talking about. She's just not, some naive commentating on these things. She also was, gave public support to a lot of them too. So it wasn't she wasn't just some decorative object in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But in specifics, she was pro-NAFTA. She was a little leery of the welfare reform at first, but then came around to it and then became an enthusiastic defender of it. She defended even after Bill left office in her 2002 memoir, Living History. She said nice things about it. She was also very vicious in her language about welfare recipients. She called them deadbeats. It was good to get these people, stop being deadbeats and get a job. Mm-hmm. And that points to something I think is really important that a lot of people don't appreciate. She has this deep Midwestern Protestant moralizing streak.
That's interesting.
And it's not just the kind of economics of what welfare reform meant or fiscal policy, but there's something about the moral discipline that really appeals to her. She grew up in a very chilly household. Her father was a conservative Republican, and that still shows. She was a Goldwater girl in '64. Of course, people do things when they're 16 years old that they later regret. I was a conservative my early years in college, too.
Hugo Black was a member of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah. But she said as late as 1996, when she was almost 50 years old, that she really was grateful for her time in the Goldwater campaign and still revered a lot of it. So there is this conservative streak politically, but also this kind of moralistic streak. She's against dirty rap lyrics too. She worked with Tipper Gore and all that stuff. Violent video games. So she's got that kind of, that Tipper Gore streak that a lot of people don't appreciate or recognize. So there's a support of welfare reform, which there's a nice passage in Living History where she says, lifted women out of poverty. They went to work, and shortly after that was written, the economy fell apart and. Scores of millions of women and children for whom she's the great advocate were thrown into poverty and remain there.
After the new economy, to use your title of your book, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, the early 2000s recession was the first blow, but then the Great Recession, 2008, was a major blow that people at the low end of the economy have not recovered from. So she supported that, and she also supported the crime bill, also with very often very lurid language. The super predators comment got a lot of attention during the campaign.
Yeah.
I'm speaking as if it's over now, but I guess it's not. But she had that notorious remark where she said we need to bring these super predators to heel. She was very much in favor of 3 strikes and you're out legislation. She complained about how long it was taking the crime bill to get through Congress. She said, it's taken 5 years to get this thing through Congress, and like some people serve shorter sentences for very serious crimes. So she wanted the thing to move more quickly through Congress so people could serve longer sentences. So she was very much behind all that. And now that it's less convenient and kind of embarrassing for her, she's turned on it. But this is her history. And I think it's not just her history, they're her instincts.
All of this sort of suggests and begs the question of why is the Afro-American community, so behind her? This results in Maryland this past Tuesday, yesterday, is indicative of how much support she really has. This is where she really slaughtered.
New York City as well.
Slaughtered in New York City as
well.
Where does this really come from? And maybe we could take a look, because obviously she's not a friend to the black underclass or to the black, population in general, in terms of policy and attitude, as you've pointed out.
It's a little difficult for a white guy to, talk about this, but I'll say some things that I've heard. I'll be the
it's okay.
The mouthpiece for them.
Right.
One is that for black people, the consequences of having a Republican president are so dire that they will make the cautious choice and go for the one more likely to win. Now, I'm not sure if that's true of Hillary, that she has a lot of liabilities. Certainly Sanders polls better in general election matchups now than she does against most of the Republican opponents. I don't know if that's that meaningful at this point, but still there's no evidence to say that she really is more electable. But the assumption is that because she's more centrist and she's been around a long time, she's the safer choice. So there's that she's more likely to beat Trump or Cruz or whatever horror the Republicans throw up. Another one is that there's some respect for her for having served under Obama as a subordinate to Obama. She's been very loyal to Obama, although there was an awful lot of tension between them in 2008. And she and Bill said really race-baity stuff about him. It was really ugly. And there was that moment in 2008, for example, when he started winning. She said, well, I'm getting the votes of hardworking Americans, white Americans. And that Bill would say all these kind of race-baity things too, but that's all forgotten now. People don't remember that. It's gotten very little play during this campaign. And the third thing is they have built this incredible machine. Since they've been running for president together for like 40 years. Right. They know everyone in politics of any significance. They've cultivated all kinds of connections. They're very, very good at that sort of thing. Bill, of course, is immensely charming, the greatest politician of our time, I guess, really. I mean, the guy just exudes magnetism. And even people who don't like his politics find him irresistible as a charmer. So that's that. And then she is very methodical. She writes the thank you notes. She knows what questions to ask. She's really good at that one-on-one sort of thing. He's much better at the big crowds and the formal events, and she is much better at these informal settings. And so they've cultivated a lot of black leadership, black politicians, black community leaders, preachers. I think that the preacher thing is probably very important, that a lot of preachers told their parishioners to go vote for Hillary. I mean, that was pretty clear.
Sure.
And there's also another issue of her being Christian. She claims that she is a believing Christian. I think that she's actually telling the truth. I think she really does have, as I said earlier, a religious streak. And I think this is especially among older black voters that Christianity appeals, that they can identify with it. And all, Bill's various peccadillos and all that stuff over the years, they kind of sympathize with him for it and forgive. I mean, the Christian forgiveness at work. It's so unlike white Protestantism, which is so punitive, I guess. So yeah, I think all those things together help explain it. But also they've been around for a long time. They're very familiar.
Right.
This guy Sanders blows in, rather unusual figure, with unknown to most people. Everybody's known the Clintons for way too long, and they're able to trade on that familiarity. But it is remarkable. Her electoral coalition during the primary season has been upper income whites and poor black people. It's just a remarkable thing. They are, but they're very skilled. They have a formidable, operation going.
Now, I think in the book, one of your main criticisms was her hawkishness, was on her foreign policy tendencies, her performance as Secretary of State. What in your mind explains her hawkishness, and what were some of the main fiascos and failures of those years?
Well, her hawkishness goes way, way back, back to her days as a Goldwater goer. When she was in high school, she had a teacher who was a raving McCarthyite anti-communist. And she fell under his influence. She also later fell under the influence of this liberal preacher who brought her to Chicago as she met Martin Luther King. So that's where the kind of the origin of her more liberal side, I guess, came. You can trace that back into her adolescence. But this hawkish teacher was a very strong influence on her for many years, and continued to be. I think she even continued to correspond with him after she went to college, and so that was always there. She has always been very, very tough, more than Bill on all kinds of things, not just military issues. But for example, the servants at the Arkansas State Governor's Mansion are prisoners serving life. So Bill and Hilary were served dinner every night by prisoners serving life. There was one that Bill liked in particular and thought of pardoning him. And Hilary said, no, you can't pardon him. Because, suppose he commits a crime and then it'll be all on you. But, his instinct was it's kind of soft. And hers was, no, you can't do that. And that is her, she's really, really tough. People like John McCain, Robert Gates have all said she's really tough. And when she got to the Senate, she wanted to join the Armed Services Committee. She was not eligible at first, but she eventually got onto it. When she was in the Senate, well, actually, when she was First Lady, she went to prayer meetings with the family, which is a very, very conservative, mostly conservative. There are a few Democrats thrown in, but it's mostly conservative Republicans, fundamentalist Protestants. She prayed with them when she was First Lady. She then joined them when she got back to the Senate. And so she has that Christian hawkish side. She fits in well with them. She got along very well with the Republicans in the Senate, much better than with the Democratic delegation. And she voted for the Iraq War. And she didn't just vote for the Iraq War. She decided not to read the National Intelligence Estimate, the classified one that CIA prepared, that showed, we don't know, but we're told, it showed that that Iraq probably didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They released a version to the public that was much more ambiguous. But members of Congress, before voting, could read the full National Intelligence Estimate. She didn't, and that's very out of character for her. She reads everything. She's very well prepared. So the only thing I can conclude is that she chose not to read it because she didn't want to know.
No, right.
She wanted to vote for the war.
Interesting.
And not only did she want to vote for the war, she actually talked up the connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, which is something that no other Democrat, not even Joe Lieberman, did. So she was out there with the Bush administration on that issue. And then people like Kenneth Pollock, who is an advisor to Bill Clinton, is a foreign policy advisor to her now, said, we told her this was BS, but she said it anyway. So she really went out of her way to push that stuff. So then, she becomes Secretary of State, nation's chief diplomat. You think within a cabinet meeting, the diplomat should be advocating negotiations, right? No, she is repeatedly the most hawkish member of the Obama cabinet on most issues. She was more hawkish than Robert Gates, the Republican Secretary of Defense. And then she pushed very aggressively to topple Gaddafi in Libya. And Gates said, I've already got 2 wars, you want me to get into a third? And she did. She pushed Obama, who was wavering and reluctant, she pushed him into getting into that, which, obviously now Libya's in total chaos. Disastrous policy.
Do you have any thought about reasons behind why Gaddafi at that moment? Why she wanted Gaddafi out? Does this go back in history to something? Because Gaddafi at that point obviously had been neutralized, for many years. We know this, and why to,
It was a very secular regime and a fairly affluent society.
So, we were kind of buddying up to him. He was not the enemy that he was 10, 20 years earlier. Well, it's hard to say why exactly. One would be she likes that Samantha Power humanitarian intervention stuff. But she also just likes to throw around American power. She thinks she's a great believer in American exceptionalism and
I see.
America's role in the world as the liberator of people. And then she just likes to throw in power. I think she really just is tough and wants to show who's boss. And when I interviewed Dick Morris in the summer of 2014, I asked him how she was going to handle the Obama legacy, because at that point, his approval ratings are in the high 40s. He was not very popular, and how is she going to deal with his legacy? And he said that they broke off with him, but he worked with them for 20 years, so he knows them very well.
Sure.
And he said what she's going to do is say, Obama's good with the poetry, but you need somebody who can get things done. And she's going to break with him on Syria. She's going to say he didn't arm the Syrian rebels fast enough. 2 weeks later, she gave that interview with Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic, in which she said he didn't arm the Syrian rebels early enough. So she's very, very predictable.
No wonder Dick Morris and Clinton parted ways.
She always likes to be on the hawkish side of everything. And just remarkable for a diplomat to. I guess Allen Dulles was also a Secretary of State who was that hawkish. But you have to go back to him.
But he was never a presidential candidate,
right?
Luckily.
So one of the things that scared me most about her becoming president. On domestic issues, I think she'd be a little different from Obama, but I think she'd be much more likely to get us into a war. She'd be much more aggressive with Russia. I think she would look for any excuse to tear up the agreement with Iran. That Iran agreement probably would have not have been negotiated had she been Secretary of State. Kerry made it happen. She's closer to Netanyahu than any other Democratic politician.
Any Democrat, right.
Obviously,
no question about that.
We're still giving Israel lots of money and arms, but there's some tensions from Netanyahu and Obama, but not with Hillary. She's made a point she would invite him to the Oval Office right away and basically do whatever Israel wants.
I was struck when she said to AIPAC that she would not adhere to any UN Security Council resolutions that were not pro-Israel.
A speech that was interrupted for applause 55 times.
Right. Yes. Right. Yeah.
And which is unnecessary to say because the U.S. can veto any resolution passed.
Exactly.
So it's a moot point, but it plays well.
But it plays well in that audience.
But I'm sure she'd be looking for any excuse to find Iran guilty of some transgression of the agreement. Obama refers to Iran as our partner in the peace agreement. She refers to Iran as the subject of the agreement. So that gives it's an insight to how she thinks.
Under subjection.
So, for all Obama's many problems, I think, especially in foreign policy, she should be a turn for the worse. And probably worse even than Trump.
And it is shocking after the situation in Iraq, in that fiasco, that they would repeat many of the same mistakes so quickly and with such...
Yeah, with such enthusiasm. You just don't learn anything. Well, somebody said you never learn anything. Nobody has ever learned anything from history, but she seems to be particularly amnesiac.
Well.
Have there been any surprises so far in the primary? Because you wrote the book, obviously, well before the primaries, which have been more eventful than anyone had thought would happen.
Yeah, when I started the research in the summer of 2014 for the Harper's article, I thought that's going to be the dullest campaign ever. It's going to be Bush, Clinton. Oh no. And low energy jab failed, but then Sanders came out of nowhere. I thought this is fun candidacy, but it's not. It's just a vanity affair. But it turned out to be quite significant. And the reaction, especially among young people, to his candidacy has been extremely encouraging. It makes me think that whatever happens with this election, there's some promising potential for the longer term there. Younger people don't really get more conservative as they get older. That's kind of a myth. People's political opinions are generally more or less fixed in their 20s, and they don't change that much after that. So this is going to be interesting as this cohort gets older and moves into positions of power and begins to dominate the electorate. There's something less gaspy about the Hillary campaign. That kind of new democratic politics that, whether you like him or not, might have had some relevance in the 1990s when crime was a problem. There was a lot of outrage about welfare. All that stuff just doesn't have any resonance anymore. And it's really hard to say what the point of her running is. Whenever I engage, people criticize my book. I say, okay, what I've read a whole lot of pro-Hillary articles now. I have professional responsibility to read everything by and about Hillary Clinton now, and I'm really
That's
I
a very
can't-
masochistic.
I know. I'm going to need a rest here after this is over.
Right.
But I find very little in the way of an actual political argument for her candidacy. What problems is she going to solve?
Right,
What
right.
constituency does she mobilize?
Right.
What good will she do? And aside from she will be the first woman president, yes, that's a good thing. We do need a woman president, but she's not my ideal. Jill Stein could be our first
Jill
woman president.
Stein's our first idea.
But leaving all that aside, it's just remarkable how little a political case there is for her. She's experienced, but as I wrote in the book, most of her experience is not all that admirable.
Right.
And it's her turn.
And it's her turn. Right. In the journey.
Yeah, in the
In
journey.
the big journey.
And
Right.
and watching her sense of entitlement, and now that she and her supporters are just so annoyed that Sanders won't,
Won't step
fold up
aside.
and go home. It's just like it's wounded narcissism.
Right,
It's like,
right.
It's my turn. Doesn't he understand?
What do you foresee, though, of this Sanders upsurge and in terms of influencing a kind of platform at the Democratic Party convention? And does this have any staying power, meat within the party once she's nominated and potentially, as you say, elected president of the United States?
Well, anything's
Yeah.
possible,
Yeah.
but the Democratic Party seems like a pretty hopeless institution. to
Hopeless,
me.
yes. Right.
And the idea of transforming it, many people have tried that without much success.
Right.
Now, the generational change might make it somewhat different, but it's been really amazing. One of the things that has been so fascinating about the Sanders campaign is watching all these sort of liberal and centrist Democrats, red bait, come out and as frank anti-communists and like denouncing even mild social democracy. As
You see
being-
this from people in the nation, even.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
going
yeah.
on in our quote flagship
Yeah.
liberal
And
left publication.
I believe it's David Plouffe, who has advised Obama, is now advising Uber. So it was quoted in the New York Times a few weeks ago saying, forget hope and change, it's hate and castrate. That's their campaign. They're running against hope now. And the fact that that Sanders brings in these social democratic policies, which, by most standards are not all that radical. It's not like he's some kind of revolutionary communist or anything. But is seen as just so far out of the possibility of reality that, and then the terms with which they've denounced it are so vehemently. It's been striking to see just how, what tools of capital they are, to put it bluntly. And this sort of brings out the classic contradiction of the Democratic Party. It is fundamentally a party of business that has to pretend not to for electoral reasons. And so all these elaborate things that people, where is their spine? Like, why don't they have their nerve? Like, don't they understand? No, it's because of that fundamental contradiction. They have to pretend to be sort of populist while not being too so, and also not exciting the hopes of their base. So they have to keep all that under management, and while pleasing their funders. And like this Hillary campaign has made it so clear by the terms in which they've denounced Sanders, and the exposure of her funding. Like the fact that the amount of money that Bill and Hillary have raised from business interests over the last 20 years, it's like, I think it's about $2 or $3 billion, according to a study by the Wall Street Journal. The foundation itself is just this giant, influence peddling and shakedown scheme. And so they're so wrapped up with big money. They're not even, I think they've reached the point where they're not even servants of capital anymore, but they're really, loyal, integrated members of the ruling class. And the Sanders campaign really helped bring that out, just how clearly that is, and how clear that is, and also how they will resist even the mildest reforms. So in the last few days, Hillary has made it pretty clear that she's not going to concede anything to Sanders, that it's just his time to give up and go home and shut up. And I think that's the way it's going to be.
That's what's going to play out.
And I think her attitude is one, all of his supporters, where are they going to go? And they're not going to vote, a lot of them won't vote for her. But she's going to say, well, who else are they going to vote for? Maybe they won't vote at all. But the other thing is, I think they figure that they can pick up enough disgruntled, like suburban votes from people who are appalled by Cruz or Trump, that they can more than make up for the loss of votes on the left side of the party. And they've just utterly written off the white working class. They're just filled with nothing but contempt for it, really. It's what, 30–40% of the electorate, but they don't care about it.
And she was in the factory in Pennsylvania. You saw the latest photo op.
Well, it's, in that article where Pluff was quoted with the hate and castrate line, Ed Rendell, the former governor of Pennsylvania, said, for every one of the voter on the left we lose, we'll get 2 suburbanites in Cleveland. So that's their attitude.
Interesting.
And that's the old DLC strategy again. That you go for these moderate suburbanites, or maybe socially liberal but not too, and fiscally conservative. That's
interesting.
That's still that DLC base they're looking at.
And you suspect that's going to be a successful strategy, that she will have an easy time against Trump in the general election?
Well, I think Trump is so appalling that most people will run away from him. He's the most widely hated, at least in polling terms, significant candidate for president ever. His net negatives are just well in the double digits. Hers are not far behind, but she's less hated than he is.
That's a new way of looking at a political national election. Not the lesser evil, but the less hated.
Yeah, and of all the prominent candidates, Sanders had the highest positives, but he's written out as not serious.
Right.
So it's a fact of Hillary's polling history that the more prominent she is, the more visible she is, the worse her approval rating. So when she falls out of view, people like her. And then when she comes into review again, people dislike her. So her peak popularity, since Gallup has been doing this, was, I believe, right after she left being Secretary of State. And then when she announced for president,
right away,
her popularity plummeted.
Right. Yeah.
And now it's at all-time lows.
So
I kept, when I first started doing this book, all these Democrats would say, why are you going after her? Why are you going after her? And I said, well, and I tried to point out to them that she has all these vulnerabilities. We didn't even talk about any of the scandals, but there's always a scandal with her. The email scandal, I think, is something there. The foundation, any of this stuff could blow up at any time. A lot of people just don't like her, for good reasons or bad, but she's extremely unpopular. Don't you think she has a lot of vulnerabilities as a candidate? And they just don't want to hear it. They stop their ears. It's remarkable to try to engage with even sophisticated intellectual Hillary supporters. They don't make arguments. It's a very emotional attachment, and one that's very heavily defended. I think you almost need a psychoanalyst to figure it out.
So it sounds like Clinton is an ideal opponent for Trump.
Yeah, but he's even
ways.
worse. He's a vile, misogynistic horror, with God knows how many scandals in his own past, and just widely hated.
But from what you said before, it seems the tendencies are going in opposite ways. Because over time, Trump is doing better and better and better, at least among the Republicans.
Yes.
Among that group. Whereas Clinton's popularity goes the opposite way, according to you. The more people see her, the more exposure she has, the less people approve of her.
Well, some of this is the function of the primary system. The primary system has never looked so crazy as it has this year. So look at national polls, and Hillary and Sanders are virtually neck and neck. Right. But she keeps winning these primaries, partly because of, like in New York in particular, the tightness of
her political machine, part of the
but also the registration. You had to declare your party affiliation last October.
Yes.
Who knew what Sanders would be like?
Who knew?
So there's that.
Right.
And a lot of primaries are closed.
Right.
Sanders did better in open primaries. So and a lot of Hillary people say, well, he's not really a Democrat. And he's getting all the votes from people who aren't Democrats. Well, of course, that's the idea in the election, right? You want that in the general election. And then you look at the Republican electorate. That is, that's a pretty fervent and extreme thing. The Republican primary voters, and the xenophobia plays pretty well with a lot of Republican primary voters. But it's 20 or 30% of the population.
Do you see her winning some of the proverbial red states going ahead, because it seems to me that Trump has a very good shot in terms of the Electoral College if it comes down to the usual 2 or 3
Florida,
crucial
Ohio.
states, Florida, Ohio, maybe even Pennsylvania, given the white working, because white
Yeah.
working class is also attracted to Trump. One of the reasons Sanders had a
Up to a
difficult
point.
time.
Up to a point.
Yeah.
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 He has a problem with women voters.
Yeah.
He would certainly carry the South
Yes.
and some of the classic red states, but I don't know if he could carry Virginia. He'll certainly win California and New York by enormous. She'll certainly win California and New York by enormous margins.
Yeah.
Most of the models I've seen have her winning fairly handily. Who knows? Anything is possible. I think that the fact that he is so much more hated than she is makes it more likely that she will win. But having an electoral contest between 2 people who are widely hated.
Yes, this is your next essay.
Strange.
Who is less hated?
Yes.
The next
Who is? What a strange democracy
yes,
we live in.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, very good. Yeah. What do you see? A lot of these are kind of obvious moves ultimately, but her relationship to finance capital as we go forward, do you see her loosening up, deregulating more and more of what was, there was a small attempt, as you know, to regulate after the 2008 Lehman Brothers debacle and the so-called Great Recession?
Well, actually, Dodd-Frank has had a little more of an effect than I thought it would.
Okay.
The banks are in better shape. They're a little less risky, a little less aggressive. And obviously, I think a lot of Republicans would like to reverse some of that. I don't know where she would stand on that. She certainly wouldn't tighten regulations.
Right.
And she might do a couple of cosmetic things to throw the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party a few bones.
Right.
But I can't imagine her doing anything to tighten up at all significantly. She is very much of that world.
Right. Right.
I think the reason that she won't release those Goldman Sachs transcripts are because, one, they're just probably incredibly banal.
Yes.
She reportedly says things like, "You can't win if you don't show up." It's like inspirational stuff like that. But also, I think she probably flattered them no end.
Of course.
And,
Well,
I could almost imagine her like thinking, "Well, we're kind of in this together. People really don't like us. We've been struggling. We had to struggle from our
Yes. Well,
and like Lloyd Blankfein,
Yeah.
son of a postal worker from the Bronx, right? They're good Americans, worked up from the bottom.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure
Yeah.
she worked that pretty hard, and then
and Bob
Goldman
Rubin
is.
was their secretary of what was
Yeah,
he?
well, actually,
Treasury, right?
Bob Rubin was the only member of the Clinton cabinet who opposed the repeal of welfare.
Yes,
so
that's right.
He was,
That's right.
he was more
That's right.
liberal than she.
That's right. That's right. Interesting.
And you suspect her administration would be a successful one in terms of the economy?
No, I don't think so. I think we have this very, very serious structural issues in the U.S. economy, and that's one of the reasons why having her be president would be so strange, because we are formally recovered from the Great Recession. Job market is back pretty much to where it once was, but it still feels awful to most people, and high levels of insecurity. A lot of, especially among younger people, doing rather poorly. Lots of debt to worry about, and growth is in very poor structural situation. And then we have all these longer-term issues like climate change. So we have all these profound structural problems. The distribution of income, the distribution of wealth, which has just become, even in capitalist terms, rather dysfunctional at this point.
Yes.
But she is in no position to address any of these issues. She's not the one, she's no FDR. She's not one.
Right. Right.
She's not somebody coming out of the capitalist class who could initiate a set of meaningful reforms that could create a new social structure of accumulation that could generate a new wave of growth. You could imagine, even in purely capitalist terms, some kind of green economy that could generate some kind of growth for several decades. But it's going to require vigorous state action for that to happen.
Absolutely.
And stepping on a lot of toes to get there.
Right.
And she is certainly not the one to do that. And I thought for half a minute that maybe Obama might step in that direction. There's some half-decent stuff in the first stimulus bill, and that was the end of it.
Right.
And He's done a couple of things on environmental regulations in the last year or so that, okay, but not what we need by any means.
I think what's very indicative is that I think the timing of Aramco, the Saudi Arabian, Arab American oil company, giving up 10% to go public, with their company is indicative of a Clinton presidency to come. That here we're going to make a lot of more money in terms of the markets, et cetera, and we're going to reorient fossil fuels as our,
Poor
as
Saudi
our
Arabia's
future.
on hard times now.
Yes, I know, especially the kingdom.
Yes.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So some other thoughts? I know you mentioned Elizabeth
My only
Warren,
question is if
but,
she's a golf player, because I see there's a strong correlation. If you're a golf player, of course you are completely in cahoots with the big financial institutions. If you don't play golf, there's a potential there. I think Bernie is not a golf player. I don't know if you
Bill
have
is.
any.
I don't know if she
Bill
does.
is. I'm sure.
Bill is, yes.
Yeah, Bill,
yes.
definitely.
Well, I've also played with this idea that the economy does better under adulterous presidents, and
That's interesting. That's good. Yeah.
Good during the the Kennedy and Johnson years.
Yes, right.
Really good under the under Bill Clinton's years. I
Yes.
don't think that's not a good portent for Hillary, because I think she has not taken her love to town very much.
Yeah. Speaking, you mentioned Elizabeth Warren. Do you see her as becoming a much more active, person in say a Clinton presidency, as representing that wing of the party that would be both confrontive and actually picking up a lot of the Sanders people within, the party? Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of respect for her.
Yeah.
I used to have her on my radio show way back before she got famous, and I communicated with her a lot. I found her extremely intelligent and principled, and just a very warm and excellent person. But I think her politics outside of financial issues are not all that much different from Hillary's.
I see. Okay.
But on the financial thing, she is very different.
very good.
No question
Yeah,
about
I
that.
thought so.
But outside of that, I don't think she's all that much different. But there is an interesting tension between the two of them, and she has not yet endorsed Hillary, and Hillary is a very vengeful person, and if you don't endorse her, she's not going to give you anything. So I don't see that she would appoint Warren to anything of any significance. And Warren has quite a perch in the Senate. She gets a lot of attention and gets a lot of things done there. So from her point of view, there's no reason to leave there, really. And so it'd be interesting to see how she would relate to Hillary as president, because on the financial issues, which are certainly not going to go away, she'd be much more of a thorn in her side than Hillary might appreciate.
So we subtitled today, we have about 3 minutes left, business as usual or worse. What would be your take on this? Are we at a normalizing business as usual, or is she going to be worse than business as usual as we go forward?
On economic issues, it's kind of hard to say. I think all other things being equal, which of course they never are, she would be a little different from Obama on most domestic kinds of issues, economic issues. Although there's a likelihood, we're going to have a recession in the next year or two. It's pretty inevitable. It's just the way capitalist economies work. And I wonder how severe it's going to be, because there's still a whole lot of imbalances and problems that never really went away. Household debt is way, way, way down, so you're not going to have quite the same problem there, but corporate debt is up. And there could be some problems with that. So who knows what could emerge out of that kind of recession. It's likely to be, I don't know, will Congress still be Republican? Maybe I guess the Democrats could flip one house, probably not both. So she's going to have a hard time getting any legislation passed. But on foreign policy, I think it'll be a turn for the worse. Certainly Obama's been very enthusiastic about sending out the drones. But he's not been that big on invading countries in the same way as George W. And I wouldn't be surprised to see her be more Bushian in her approach to foreign policy. I think she would be more likely to challenge Iran, more likely to challenge Russia, and much more supportive of Israel, much more confrontational with China as well. She was pushing a higher level of engagement with China, which means sending
I kind of think
Navy
of
down
her
to
as
the South China Sea.
as a mix between Angela Lansbury and Meryl Streep in Manchurian Candidate Part 1 and 2. But you're kind of diffusing that by saying that she's not pro-China and
No,
she's not
no,
going to go. But anyway, her personality is very much like those two.
Well, I
Yeah,
think she'd
yeah,
want to have
yeah.
more of a military confrontation
Yes,
with China.
yes,
Or be more
interesting.
concerned about
More
containing
concerned,
Chinese
right,
military ambitions
right,
and political
interesting.
ambitions than Obama, who has now turned out, in the most recent interviews, to be fairly skeptical about the foreign policy establishment and this
Right.
fetish of credibility and all that.
Right.
She's still very much a part of that world.
Okay, and we have about 30 seconds. Maybe you can say one word about her attraction to the military before we sign off today. And we thank you very much.
An interesting issue I'd like to see many of her feminist supporters take on. Because she's a woman, does she have to be more aggressive than she would otherwise be? Now, I think she really does. It's authentic. It's not just put on for political reasons.
Right.
But I also wonder, that's perhaps a danger of having a woman president would be that she would have to prove her toughness
Right.
with military action in a way that
action.
a man wouldn't, and that's a little scary.
Right, excellent.
Okay.
So thank you very, very much. This
Thank
was
you.
very informative, and yeah, we'll hopefully have you on again after the election to assess her.
If I'm not under
first
house
year-
arrest.
If not
Yes.
under house arrest, right.
Secret
All of
Service
us,
will
we'll
be
send this
busy.
out to the Clinton Foundation. So great. So thank you very much. This has been another episode of The Radical Imagination. We thank Doug Henwood for joining us today. Please purchase his book from Seven Stories Press. It'll be out in a month, right?
Unclear, but several
Unclear.
weeks.
Several books, okay. And My Turn, Hillary Clinton Targets the Presidency, again by Doug Henwood. And thanks to my co-host Peter Bratsis for, as his usual, insightful comments and direction here on stage. And we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you. Okay.